So, my name is PJ Holden. I'm a comic book artist, and I'm currently drawing a book called World War Thule. I've just finished a book called World of Tanks. Both of them feature tanks heavily, so this tutorial is really about drawing tanks and so on. So most of what I do is actually on paper, so the accompanying tutorial will cover, the actual process of drawing it. What I'm going to do here in the video is show you some of the technical things I do in what was Manga Studio and is now Clip Studio Paint. You'll have to pardon me, I have a little bit of a cough, so you might hear some coughs. Okay, so I've already scanned in the document here. I'm using this it's a MacBook Pro. I've scanned in the document. This is my actual page here, first page. What I've got to do is I've already created a document called World War Thule. Clip Studio Paint allows you to have multi-page documents. Multi-page documents are really useful because you can actually see, if you have a 7-page story, you can see every single page of that. And you'll see I've already scanned in some background sketches and placed them on this document. It allows me to keep all of my various sketches together. So I can actually have a single document that has scans, finished artwork, process pieces, and so on. So if I ever need to go and do a collection of the book, I've got all of that in one place, and there's no hunting around looking for individual documents. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to open up page 1. So you'll see there the title of it's World War Thule, and it says 1/8, which indicates this is page 1 of 8 pages. I can go back into my pre-scan document, and I will now just grab that using the marquee tool, and just using Command and C copy, and then Command and V paste, or Control C and Control V paste on a PC. So you'll see here. I measure quite sort of. Let's throw all that away there for a second. This pressing tab gets rid of all of those. Pressing the space bar allows me to move it around. You can see the document has these blue lines, which are indicators of where the live area is for the artwork, and these lines here are where the trim area is. I can actually, because the artwork is drawn at the same size as this document, I should be able to line up. The artwork actually has drawn on it a live area as well. You can just about see. So I'm going to line that up there. Not always accurate because sometimes you scan things slightly angled and so on. But that should line up nicely. I can zoom out a little bit. There we go. You'll see there I've got that little mark there is obviously an eraser rubbing that's got caught in the scan. But that's okay because I can tidy that up later. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to darken this down, so the change in the tone of it. Ordinarily, I've got a Manga Studio, or sorry, a Clip Studio Paint action setup, which will do this for me, which will change the colors so it's sort of slightly darker and so on. But I'll do this manually so you can see the process. So what I normally do is I go into Tonal Correct and do Tone Curve. This is a black and white layer, or a grey wash layer, and I'll just sort of bop that down. So now I've got that kind of shape, which basically gives me a sort of more solidly black and white layer. Okay, so that's the first thing I normally do. The second thing I normally do is this little pencil icon indicates at Manga Studio that this should be treated as a draft layer. And draft layers are their own kind of special beast in Clip Studio. I'll use the phrase Clip Studio and Manga Studio interchangeably because they are interchangeable. If you buy the software now, it'll be called Clip Studio, but it was Manga Studio for the longest time. So I'll set this as draft layer. What that allows me to do is in things like if you go to print a document and you want to say you've got a layer say you've got a page that includes inks, and a page that includes rulers on it, and a page that includes borders and all sorts of layers. And it also includes a draft pencil layer like this. And if you go to print, you can tell Clip Studio Paint to exclude the draft layer. So even though you can see your pencils underneath your inks, if your pencils are set up as a draft layer and you go to print, it will only print your inks. It's quite clever. It's quite useful too whenever if you want to export, because again you can export and exclude the draft layer. And so whenever the finished file is exported, as I do here, for example, You can see there, output image draft, so you can turn that off and on. So if I want to export an inked page, I say I had the inks on that on a different layer, I could just ignore the draft and it would ignore that draft layer, and it would be like it's turning the draft layer off. So that's the first thing I do, is I make that a draft layer. There's other features in, if you're inking or drawing, you can tell certain tools to ignore any draft layers, so that if you're using the fill tool, for example, and you draw, let's do that now. If I have say a layer here, I've got a fill tool. I've got lots of different kinds of fill tools here. So I've got a fill tool that says use all layers, but I can actually tell it to use all layers but ignore, there's the layers it will use. So all layers, reference layers, select layers, layer, and folders, and you can actually tell it to ignore draft layers. Do not refer to draft layers, which means filling there will fill it all in. If I stop ignoring draft layers and I do fill, you'll see that it now pays attention to the draft layers. So it's quite a handy thing to use. I don't think it's a thing that only exists in Clip Studio Paint. It doesn't exist in Photoshop, as far as I'm aware. So it's a very handy thing to know about. So that's one thing. That's one thing I just set as a draft layer. Another thing I normally do is I change the name of the layer. This is just purely for me to pencils. And then a third thing I usually do, not always, but I usually do, is layers can hold grayscale. Layers can hold grayscale. They can also hold white, and they can have a transparency applied to them. A transparency is, this works differently than how it works in Photoshop. You can have a transparency in a mask. So what I normally do is I turn off the white, the expression of white color here, and what that does basically is it means that it's the wrong way around. What I do is I normally allow it, change the expression color to be only black. And what that does essentially is it turns it into, it doesn't look like it's changed anything at all here, but the one difference is that now that white is actually transparent, and I can prove that by turning off the paper layer, and you can see that the checkerboard underneath it. I do that, it's a sort of habitual. I like using transparencies rather than pure white and black for drawing stuff, because it means then I can draw underneath that layer. I can put things below it. I can actually copy things and put them on top of it. I can copy things from that layer, and the copied elements will also have the same transparencies applied to them. So if I were to change something, for example, if I were to edit that face, let's make that face a bit smaller. If I enlarge it like that, you'll see it's transparent. If I left white on, so if I'd left the white on that, let's undo that so we can go backwards to before. So if there's the white on it now and transformed, you'll see that it's not transparent. You can't see behind it. So there's, I mean, your mileage may vary in all of these things. To me, I find it more useful to have the pencil layers as a pure black with transparency rather than black and white with no transparency. And that's the way I like to work. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to shrink this panel, this first panel with the tank down a little bit, because you can see there that it's actually buttoned up against the edge of the page. And it will actually be, if that's printed in a comic, it'll be trimmed so you'll see even less of it. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I can get as much of that tank in as possible. So I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. That's just using the Command T. I sort of selected it with a marquee and it did Command T. I'll shrink it down a bit. I'm not going to bother repenciling all of that undergrowth. I'll just add all of that in the inks. I kind of find stuff like that's pretty easy to add as you go. And then we should get a wee bit more of that tank in there. The next stage is to add a panel frame. So that's pretty easy. A panel frame allows me to cut it up into panels. So I'm going to add a layer, new layer, frame border panel. This is the way you can change these and you can have different things in it. I just keep the default name because I only ever have one panel frame. Line width is how thick the panel border is. I like 1.4, it's a nice thickness, and I always draw borders on it. So that does that. Now we've got a panel frame border which is sort of covers the entire page. Anything underneath the mask that you see here will ordinarily not be seen by anyone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to split that into two panels. So if I use the panel frame splitter tool, so divide frame folder. There's actually divide frame border is a better tool, because if you divide frame folder you'll end up with two frame folders. I like keeping one because it keeps things nice and simple. The simpler this is, the easier I find these things are. I tend to stick to one ink layer, one pencil layer, one frame layer, and it keeps things nice and simple and you don't get bogged down too much and stuff. So we'll split that. I'm holding the shift key and then using the mouse left to right, and it automatically sort of draws it as a straight line. And you can see I can jump through different angles there. While I'm holding the shift key, those angles are fixed at 45-degree increments. If I let go of shift, you can see I can get all sorts of angles in there, but I'll go with 45. There we go. That's kind of cool, but what I really want is I want to make that first panel full bleed, so the entire page is that. Now there's two ways of doing this. One is to delete this panel altogether. That gets rid of it, but you can see the mask still exists all around the page, because all I've really done is I've got rid of that panel. I haven't got rid of the second panel, and so it has this mask. Now if I actually copied that pencil layer into the frame folder, you'll see that it actually cuts it out altogether. It literally just vanishes. So what I want to do though, again for simplicity's sake, I rarely do that. I usually keep that sort of on separate layers. So what I'm going to do though is bring back the other panel. So I'm going to undo. There we go. So I'm undone now. I've gone back a couple of steps. So we'll add that panel border again. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this panel border, I'm just going to stretch the corners off it until it's off the page. Now you'll see there that as I move the other bit of the panel border down, it's moving that other one as well. And that's because Manga Studio is kind of smart and it's trying to help you in a way. What it's trying to do is when you've got a panel border and you want to move it, it assumes what you're doing is moving things to allow the other panels to breathe a bit. But you can turn that off. You can see there's an option there within the object subtool which says work with another frame border. We can turn that off, and now what happens is when I move the panel border down, you'll see that should happen now. Now I am going to go with something like that. The reason for that is I'm going to draw jungle all around here, and I'm going to stop dead here. No jungle there, and that's partly storytelling. That's partly to allow these figures here the room to kind of breathe. It allows this panel a wee bit of breathing room. It allows the reader to sort of see there's lots of stuff going on, but not go. I could equally valid as to take that panel off the page altogether and have that as though it's an inset panel. In that instance, though, you may find yourself needing to add a little white panel border around the black as well, because the colouring might all merge those two panels together. So it's maybe just a little bit easier to give that second panel its own sort of dead space around there, so it makes it easier to show a reader they should be going from one to the other. And then the last thing I do once I've done that is I will change now this pencil layer colour to what's often called non-repro blue. It's actually, though, the best colour to use is a cyan, as light a cyan as you think your printer can handle. So this is what I normally have, and then what I'll do is I'll print this out. And the important thing is when I'm printing this out, I keep the black panel border, because there's no point in me drawing a panel border. If the panel borders are fine, I just let them sit as they are. I'll print this out, and I'll usually, what I'll do is I'll print it out on the reverse side of the pencil page, because again, there's no point in having two pages. You know, once you've drawn, if you draw say 250 pages a year, and you use 2 pages for every single page that you draw, that is 500 pages per year, and storage becomes a genuine problem. If you're all digital, it doesn't matter, and really I could start inking right now if I was going to ink digitally, but I like to ink traditionally, so I'm going to print this out and I'll be back to show you what to do with the scanned inks. Okay, at this point I have now inked the drawing. I inked it on paper using a pen, a nib dip pen, and a brush. So it's a sort of mixture of those things, and along with a little bit of bits and pieces of other things to get all the marks on the page so far. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this scan document, as you see my scanner's giving it an automatic name. I'm going to take that scan document and put it into World War II page 1 of ink. So I'm going to do Command C or Command A to select everything there, and Command C to copy everything. Again, on a Mac, I'm on a Mac, so a PC would be Control C, Control V, obviously. So I'm just going to hide these other layers here that were the pencil layers. You can see them in the blue, the light cyan there. One thing I would point out is after the last bit of the video, I repenciled the tank, just to get. You're always sort of playing with reference. One of the hardest things to do on a vehicle like a tank is get a sense of its scale, and it just felt too small before, so this sort of allowed me to pump it up a bit. I pumped up the tank. I actually think I pumped it up a bit too much, so I'm going to take the pencils in. So let's hide all of that, and Control V. We'll put our inks back in the page. Now I'll use, because the page I draw is slightly bigger than the comic size, I'll use these panel borders to help me mark out exactly where this should go. So I'm going to line them up with the bottom of the live page area, and that's grand. Now I have a bunch of actions. One of those actions is clean up line art, which I'll show you what it does here. It does various things, and I'll just run that action. There's lots of things that I would normally do with a piece of artwork. Take a second to go. There we go. So now let's see what the differences are. Well, first of all, it's called it line art rather than, so the name of it now is line art. It's set a color which is a kind of a light blue. It's cleaned up some of the dirt from the scan, some of the smaller marks. It's automatically cleaned those marks up. There's some of the bigger marks are still there. That's okay. I can erase those with a just quickly fix those. There we go. Now, what I'm going to do is with this is I'm going to add a little bit of texture to it. I'll do that first of all by masking out the two panels. So I've got 2 panels here I want to mask out. So I'm going to draw a rectangular marquee around there. This is the mask that I want to. These are the bits I want to ignore. So pressing Shift and marquee, you get a sort of plus sign that'll allow you to. It does 2 things actually. Holding Shift down will constrain the movement of a marquee to square shape, but will also turn it into an additive marquee, so it'll add to the selection. And there we go. Now, I want actually the mask to be the reverse of this. So there's a little reverse mask function, which is just below here. So we can tap that, and that'll invert the mask. So now the mask is sort of reversed. And then what I'll do is I'll create a brand new layer, and I will press the create layer mask, which will use the mask that I've already selected to create a layer mask. Then I'll click on the layer itself, and now anything I do here, and I've got a couple of clever little brushes. One of them is splatter. Let's see. Too many brushes. There we go. Where's my splatter? And that's only going to appear in the masked area. Now the reason I've given this a separate layer instead of just doing it straight onto the ink layer is now I can erase some of that splatter if I want, and it's perfectly okay. Now I can also use sort of reverse splatter to kind of clear some of it up. I can also use white splatter on top of that as well, because the layer has 3 colors on it. So one of the colors is black, one of the colors is white, and the other color is transparent. So I'm actually splattering white on this, which is sort of the equivalent of using whiteout. So I can add a little bit of white splatter to things. And again, because it's on a separate layer, if I want to, I can erase that white splatter as well, so that it only appears in certain areas. Take it all out there. The problem is it looks a bit like it's snowing now, so might be too much. And really all I'm trying to do is, at this point, is just focus your attention onto the central tank as it comes through. Add a lot of movement. You can see the white's added lots and lots of movement there. I don't want the reader to get too bogged down in what they're looking at. I don't want them to go, oh, look at all that gorgeous background. I want them to, you know, there's a big tank and it's in the jungle. And what I'm also going to do here is, I think the commander figure on the lead tank in the tank is a little too small. It's a judgment call, this, really, because I don't have quite enough reference to be able to be 100% sure about the sizes of all these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask out that lead figure using a lasso marquee. I'll draw around it. You see, my inking's quite sloppy when you get to this size, but the important thing is that you don't get to this size. Readers will not see anything this size. So that little bit of the tank here is called the cupola. So what I'm going to do is so I've selected around there, but you always end up not quite getting everything. So I'm going to go into selection quick mask. What that'll do is turn that into a red area. But that red area can be drawn on now with your normal drawing tools. So I can use the drawing tools now to kind of make sure my selection covers everything I want to pick out. And also deselect areas that I don't want. Just using erase. And that should sort of maximize the accuracy of the mask. And then I can turn off quick mask. So I can quick mask, turn that off. And it turns back into the marching ants. So I will then cut this figure off here. Okay. And then in order so I can see things better, I'm going to make this layer blue. And I'm going to paste the commander figure back in. So she's gone back exactly where she was. Because that's what happens when you cut and paste. But I'm going to change the size of her now. And this should allow me to judge too big there. Yeah, just a little bigger. She doesn't need to be too much bigger. Sort of the size I'm trying to go for is about that sort of height. So and I'll put her a little deeper into the cupola there. And then what I can do is, because I've got the layer below as a blue line, I can then erase like that. And then I can erase the blue underneath of it. We don't want to be seen anymore. It's just one of the things with traditional inking is that you do tend to get these kind of scratchy lines that you don't get with digital, and they can be quite ugly when you zoom really close into something. But the reality is that it was drawn at that size. That's the one-to-one relationship size that I have, and it actually prints, roughly speaking, about that size. So all of those lines just suddenly become a wee bit sharper, and they don't matter so much. So if I'm happy with that, I can then turn that layer back to black. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I might actually just use a bit of white now, or clear line now, to just pop some of these things a little bit. There you go. We have our tank crew. Get rid of that, that's a little bit too. There we go. Now, one of the other things I want to do is add a little brush in here. So I'm going to create a new brush. I'm going to do that very simply by creating a nice new document. Doesn't matter what size the document is really, all that matters is that it's a pure black and white layer. About 600 dots per inch. And I'm going to create a kind of jungle brush. Sort of ferns. These are big bold shapes, because what I really want to do is I'm going to kind of create a kind of silhouette brush rather than an accurate kind of pin sharp brush. I'm just going to fill blacks in all of these. On the tutorial, I talk about creating your own shortcuts in Clip Studio Paint, which is what I've done here. So pressing F for me brings up the fill brush, or fill tool rather. Okay, let's add a little. Let's take some mix out of this. Okay, so I've selected that whole fern. I'm going to create my edit. What I want to do basically is material, register material image as a brush. So we'll call it fern 1. I think they must have moved that menu option around. Use for a brush tip. I store all of my images in the brush material. So fern 1. And then what I'll do is I'll create a brush. We will base it off a previous brush I've used called the splatter brush, which is basically a kind of a brush that randomly sprays a particular shape down. If I look at this now, you'll see the brush shape is a single The brush tip is a single random splatter that I've scanned. So if I copy this brush then, and we call it Fern, press that button will give me a copy of it, we'll call it Fern. It doesn't need to be named Fern, it could be anything because it's not doing anything clever with the other name. The other one's called Fern 1 just because I can remember that. So if I look for Fern 1, there it is. There we go, so select Fern 1 and you'll see it's kind of, I don't quite know how to describe that. It's more like a Christmas tree thing, but that's okay because what we can do is we can change the spray effect. Let's see. It's got a random direction. That's fine. Actually, we can turn off the random direction. So direction of pen, for example. We can give it a wee test there. It's a bit too big right now. A bit too small. Okay, it looks absolutely rubbish. But that's okay, because we're going to fix that. Brush shape. So brush shape is brush tip. That's fine. Spraying effect. It doesn't have a spray effect. Stroke. Yes. So here we want to do a stroke. There we go. This controls how close the thing comes out. It'll still come out too close together. I think maybe we'll go back to doing random shapes then, or random directions. Direction of lines, good actually. Direction of line allows me to do stuff like that. Up the size a bit. Vaguely pineapple-like. There we go. There we go. Starting to look like ferns now. That's it. We're starting to get something fern-like. Yeah, there we go. The trick to this, I think, the trick to all of these things is to use them to figure out. There we go. See, this will be a good foreground fern. Right. One of the things with it, let's move that there. Because it's mapped to the direction of the line, if I move from left to right like that, it puts the fern so that what I've drawn as the back of the fern goes to the front, which is not a good idea. If I draw from left to right then, I get that kind of ferny shape with the background there, which is sort of what I'm after. Now, what I really want to do though is add another fern in there. So that fern is great, but now we need to add another one that looks not unlike it, so I'll add just another layer. I'll turn that to blue and sort of pop it further into the background. The reason I'm doing that really is just that it means I can sort of base my new fern that I'm going to draw on what's already been done, but without sticking to it too rigidly. So especially now that I've seen what the fern looks like in action. I know, for example, that foreground, the front of it's going to be more important than the back of it, because the back of it's going to be blurred into one big black area. So what I might do is just add a little bit of this sort of random noise. Let's fill these in. Oh. I've got currently selected fill all areas, so I'll fill all layers, so I'll select fill current layer only. Oh, there we go. I left a little bit of a hole in that one, obviously. Okay, so we can now take mix out of that too. And we can select it. Now, one thing I would say is because I'm going for silhouettes is what I want. I want a nice complex looking silhouette. So let's register material, register image. We'll call that Fern 2. Use for brush tip shape and image material brush. This bit doesn't matter so much where it goes. What's important is this bit where you register for a brush tip. It needs to be registered for a brush tip in order to use it as a brush tip. So we go back into our Fern brush, which I have here, and edit that again, and we'll add this other brush tip to it. Fern 2. Okay. Now we've got 2, and that should give us a sort of reasonable mixture of ferns and undergrowth. Oh. The important thing with this pen is to never use it going left to right unless you want your ferns upside down. And always use it. Never use it right to left, sorry. Never use it right to left. Always use it left to right. So for example, if I draw a straight line left to right, you'll see that. If I draw it right to left, you'll get that. So we can, there's more things you can do in here for randomness. If you're doing it in color, you could adjust the sort of density and all sorts of things. We could use it as a spray instead of what I am using it, and when you use it as a spray, you'll get much more random sort of output of it. Which the thing is, the brush is quite large, so when you're using it as a spray, you've got to shrink things down. But actually, it's fine like this. It's fine as long as I remember to paint it in the right direction. It'll be fine. So that'll do. We can add more ferns in there, but I'll just do the 2 for the moment, and we'll go back into our page 1. And what I'll do is I'll add the ferns to this layer, and I'll add them sort of right here. I'll add them to the foreground. It's interesting, it's a little too small. I probably increase the size of that brush for some of this. There we go. And then actually, we could do the upside down ones up here, couldn't we? In fact, if I wanted, now we've got, you can see how effective some of the white ferns there are. So now we've got that. That's brought us even closer into the jungle. And that's it. I think I'm happy with that. So thank you very much. I hope you've learned, I hope I've been able to give you something useful. And I'll see you at the next tutorial. Bye.